She was 34 years old. She had a 7-year-old daughter who still slept with a stuffed rabbit named Peanut, and a mother who called her every Sunday morning without fail. On the night of September 12, 2004, Karen Aldridge drove away from her shift at Millhaven Community Hospital in Millhaven, Kentucky, and never made it home. That is not a story about a woman who walked away from her life. That is a story about a man who took it from her, and then stood at her memorial service, hands folded, head bowed, accepted a hug from her mother while carrying the truth inside him like a stone in a closed fist. And it would take 9 years, 2 detectives, a cold case database no one had built yet, and a strand of DNA preserved on the collar of a borrowed coat to finally expose what he had done. But before we get to any of that, we have to go back to the fall of 2004. Because to understand what was lost that night, you first have to understand who Karen Aldridge was. Millhaven sat in the hill country of eastern Kentucky, a town of about 6,000 people whose main street still had an actual barber shop with a striped pole out front, and a diner called Patsy's, where the coffee came in ceramic mugs and nobody asked what you wanted. You got whatever Patsy felt like making that morning. And you were glad for it. In 2004, the town was the kind of place where high school football games filled the stands regardless of the team's record, and where a new neighbor could expect a casserole at their door within 48 hours of moving in. It wasn't utopian. It had its struggles. But it was a community in the truest sense of the word, and Karen Aldridge had lived in it her whole life. She had grown up 3 streets over from where she eventually bought her own house, a modest 2-bedroom with a porch swing and a flower bed she tended with the same quiet stubbornness she brought to everything she cared about. She had grown that flower bed from seed, actually, starting the seedlings on her kitchen windowsill every February in little plastic cups she labeled with a marker, because she was the kind of person who paid attention to small things. The porch swing had belonged to her grandmother. She'd refinished it herself the summer after her grandmother died. She was a registered nurse in the emergency department at Millhaven Community Hospital, a position she had held for 8 years. Her colleagues described her as the person you wanted beside you during a crisis, calm without being cold, efficient without being hard. She had a gift for making frightened patients feel less frightened, and in an ER, that was not a small thing. She had been offered a supervisor role twice and turned it down both times, not because she wasn't capable, but because the floor was where she wanted to be. That's where the people are, she told Donna. That was the whole explanation. Her daughter Maya was in 2nd grade that fall. Karen had raised her largely on her own since Maya's father left the picture when Maya was 3. It wasn't a bitter story. Karen didn't talk about it much. And when she did, it was without venom. She simply got on with things. On weekday mornings, she made Maya's lunch while the Today Show played in the background, and the school bus came at 7:15. And on weekends, they went to the farmer's market on Elm Street and argued companionably about which kind of apple was best. Karen believed in Honeycrisp. Maya was committed to Fuji. It was a debate with no end in sight. She had a best friend named Donna Perkins, who worked the same unit at the hospital and had been her closest friend since nursing school. They had met during a pediatric rotation in 1994, bonded over a shared distaste for a particularly difficult attending physician, and had stayed close ever since. They carpooled 3 days a week, switched off every month, and shared the particular shorthand that develops between people who have seen the same hard things together over many years. They texted in shorthand, only they understood. They covered each other's shifts without being asked. Donna would later say that Karen was the most quietly courageous person she had ever known. She meant it in every sense. That September had been warm for the hill country. The kind of warmth that made people forget autumn was coming until one morning the air shifted, and you could smell it. Karen had worked a 12-hour shift on the 12th, a Sunday. She clocked out at 11:47 p.m. She said goodnight to 2 colleagues at the nursing station. She stopped at her locker. She walked to the parking lot. Her Pontiac Bonneville was found the next morning, 7/10 of a mile from the hospital, in the gravel lot of a closed farm supply store on Route 9. The engine was off. Her keys were on the seat. Her purse was gone. She never came home to Maya and the stuffed rabbit named Peanut. It was Donna who raised the alarm first. When Karen didn't show for their Monday carpool, Donna called twice. No answer. She drove to Karen's house and found Maya sitting outside in her school clothes, waiting for a mother who wasn't coming. That image, Maya on the porch step, backpack on her lap, is the one Donna still cannot describe without her voice going quiet. At 7:55 a.m. on September 13th, 2004, Donna called the Millhaven Police Department. The car on Route 9 was located by 9:30 a.m. By noon, Deputy Sheriff Marcus Webb of the Grant County Sheriff's Office had taken lead on the investigation. He was 41 years old. A Grant County man his whole life, the kind of detective who kept handwritten timelines on yellow legal pads and filed them in labeled folders in a cabinet he'd bought with his own money. The parking lot told a partial story. Gravel doesn't hold footprints cleanly, but a sweep of the area found 2 things. A tire impression from a vehicle that had parked adjacent to Karen's Pontiac, notably wider than hers, and a button. A single button, dark navy, the kind that belonged on a jacket or a blazer. It had no immediately obvious significance. It was bagged, labeled, and entered into evidence. Nobody could have known then how long that button would matter. Webb developed 2 persons of interest in the first week. The first was a former patient Karen had been involved in a workplace dispute over, a man who had filed a grievance against the hospital and named Karen in it. He had a history of threatening language toward hospital staff. Investigators spoke to him twice. His alibi for the evening of September 12th was solid. 3 witnesses and a credit card receipt from a restaurant 40 miles away put him at dinner until nearly midnight. He was eliminated. The second was Karen's downstairs neighbor, a 28-year-old named Brett Calloway, who had recently gone through a difficult breakup and whom 2 residents of the building described as having an unrequited interest in Karen. Calloway was questioned at length. He became upset during questioning, which initially drew more attention to him, but he had spent that Sunday at a family gathering in Laurel County with 14 relatives who confirmed it. His DNA was collected voluntarily. It did not match trace DNA recovered from the inside collar of a jacket found 4 days after Karen's disappearance, discarded in a creek bed half a mile off Route 9. That jacket was the most significant physical evidence in the case. It was a men's size large, dark wool, the kind sold at any department store across a dozen states in the late 1990s. 1 navy button was missing from the right cuff. The button from the parking lot matched it in size and thread pattern. Inside the collar was a biological trace, just enough. Donna was extracted and profiled. It went into the state database. It went into CODIS, the national database. Nothing came back. There was a 3rd thread Webb pursued and could never fully close. A male co-worker from the hospital, a lab technician named Gary Mace who had worked the same Sunday shift as Karen and whose timeline after clocking out at 10:30 p.m. was never fully accounted for, remained on the periphery of the investigation for nearly a year. Mace had been cooperative initially, then retained an attorney, which is every person's right, but which in the context of an open murder case created a friction that was difficult to set aside. He consented to a DNA sample in early 2005. It did not match the jacket. He moved to Ohio in February of that year, and the investigation in Millhaven ran out of threads to pull. Webb pushed anyway. He followed smaller leads, a series of records requests from the hospital, interviews with former patients who had interacted with Karen, a canvas of businesses along Route 9. He drove the route between the hospital and the farm supply lot himself, twice, looking for anything that the initial investigation might have missed. He found nothing new. He wrote it all down on yellow legal pads and filed it in labeled folders in the cabinet he had bought with his own money. By early 2005, the case had no viable suspect. By the end of the year, it had gone officially cold. But Marcus Webb did not close the cabinet. While Webb worked, Ruth Aldridge was doing what nobody officially asked her to do. She had assembled her own informal record. She kept a notebook. She wrote down everything anyone told her, every name that surfaced in conversation, every detail that seemed to matter even if she couldn't say why. She was a school librarian. She knew how to organize information. She knew that sometimes the right detail is invisible until you have cataloged enough of the others that suddenly it has a place to fit. She didn't know whose name would eventually fill the blank she left on the page in her notebook where the answers should have been. She kept writing anyway. Meanwhile, Karen's mother, Ruth Aldridge, 62 years old, a woman who had worked 30 years as a school librarian and who had a way of folding her hands on the table in front of her that made people feel they were being heard, had moved into Karen's house to care for Maya. She did it without being asked. She simply packed a bag, drove over, and was there when Maya came home from school that Monday and every Monday after that. The grandmother who hadn't planned on raising a second child did exactly that, and she did it without complaint, because the alternative was unthinkable. The years did what years do. They accumulated. By 2006, 1 year had passed, then 2, then 3, and Millhaven moved through its seasons with the ordinary business of living. The house next door to Karen's had a new family in it. Young couple, 2 kids, a dog that barked every morning at the mail carrier. People who had never known Karen Aldridge were now her neighbors. Her flower bed survived 2 more winters before the new family, not knowing what it was or where it had come from, turned it over and planted grass. By 2007, the case appeared as a single paragraph in a Kentucky State Police annual cold case summary. It was 200 words. It did not capture anything true about Karen Aldridge. Ruth read it and said nothing. By 2008, Donna Perkins had transferred to a hospital in Lexington for a promotion she had earned and deserved, though the move still felt, to her, like leaving something unfinished. She called Ruth every month. She called on Maya's birthdays. She called on the anniversary of September 12th. And the 2 women would talk for a long time, or sit quietly on the phone together. And that was enough. By 2009, Maya was 12 and had her mother's eyes and a quiet, watchful way of moving through the world that Ruth recognized and understood. She was doing well in school. She was doing well by any external measure that someone looking from the outside might apply. But she slept with a stuffed rabbit still, past the age when other kids put those things away. And Ruth never said a word about it. By 2010, the children who had grown up on Karen's street and watched the search parties gather in the first weeks after her disappearance were in high school. Some of them barely remembered it. The reward poster in the window of Patsy's diner had faded to near illegibility by then, the ink bleached out from years of morning sun through the front glass. But Patsy left it up. She'd asked Ruth's permission before putting it there in the first place, and she didn't feel it was her place to take it down without asking. Ruth never asked her to. Marcus Webb retired from the sheriff's office in 2010. He was 57, He took the Karen Aldridge case file with him in a banker's box and put it in his home office on the shelf beside his service commendations. His wife, a woman of considerable patience, asked him once if he was going to be able to let it go someday. He told her probably not. She said she hadn't thought so. She brought him coffee when he worked late in that office, and she didn't ask further questions, and that was love in the plainest and most durable form. In 2011, the state of Kentucky allocated funding to a cold case unit within the state crime lab, and what had become possible with forensic genealogy DNA analysis, the technique of uploading crime scene DNA to public ancestry databases and tracing distant relatives back to a single unknown contributor, had begun showing results in cases across the country. Webb read about it in a magazine at his dentist's office. He set the magazine down, sat in the waiting room for another 10 minutes, and then picked it up and read the article again. He went home and called the unit the same afternoon. The case had been cold for 7 years when Marcus Webb made that call. He was retired. He had no standing to push it. He pushed it anyway. Every case on this channel represents weeks of digging through records, verifying facts, and piecing together real lives that deserved better. If you want us to keep uncovering the truth behind stories like this one, please take a second to like this video, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Your support is what makes this possible. Now, let's get back to Karen. It was a Tuesday morning in March 2013 when analyst Claire Voss at the State Crime Lab received a match alert from the genealogy database where the Karen Aldridge DNA profile had been uploaded. She was at her desk with a half-eaten breakfast sandwich and a stack of 3 other case files when the alert came through. She read the screen. She read it again. Then she picked up the phone and called the cold case unit supervisor. "I think we have a family connection on Aldridge," she said. "A strong one." The process had worked exactly as designed. The trace DNA from the jacket collar had found a partial family match, not the contributor himself, but a distant relative who had voluntarily submitted their DNA to a genealogy ancestry website to explore their family history. From that relative, analysts built outward through a family tree, following branches, narrowing candidates by age, gender, and geography, until one name kept surfacing as the most statistically probable source of the biological material. His name was Douglas Fenwick. He was 48 years old. He had lived in Millhaven for his entire life. He was a deacon at First Baptist Church on Cedar Street, the same church Karen Aldridge's family had attended. He had been at Karen's memorial service. He had spoken briefly to Ruth Aldridge and told her he was sorry for her loss. Records show he had also, in the weeks before Karen disappeared, volunteered twice at the hospital, part of a faith-based patient visitation program. He had access to the parking lot. He knew what time second-shift nurses finished. He had never once been on the radar of the investigation. The jacket had belonged to a colleague. Fenwick had borrowed it and never returned it. The colleague confirmed this. He had lent it to Fenwick at a church event 2 weeks before Karen disappeared. Doug had said he'd forgotten to bring it back. That had been that. Investigators obtained a DNA sample from Fenwick covertly through a discarded coffee cup recovered from a table at a coffee shop he visited 3 mornings a week. It went to the lab. It came back. It matched the collar. It matched the parking lot. It matched 9 years of unanswered questions. Douglas Fenwick was arrested on a Thursday afternoon in April 2013 at his home on Poplar Street in Millhaven, 3 blocks from the house where Karen had grown up. 2 investigators from the State Cold Case Unit made the arrest, accompanied by Deputy Travis Holt of the Grant County Sheriff's Office, who had been a rookie deputy when the case first opened and had never stopped thinking about it. A neighbor across the street watched through her curtains. Fenwick came out of the house without incident. He looked, the neighbor later said, like he had been waiting for it. The Millhaven community's response was what it always is when the answer turns out to be someone trusted, someone seen, someone who put his hands together in prayer beside you on Sunday mornings. First, disbelief. Then a slow, terrible rearranging of memory. People began recalling the small things they had noticed but dismissed. The way he sometimes seemed to know things about Karen before others did. A comment he had made once, in passing, that had struck someone as odd and been forgotten. These things surface after an arrest like sediment lifted from still water. They were there all along. Nobody had known to look. Douglas Fenwick was charged with murder in the first degree. His attorney entered a not guilty plea. The trial took place in the spring of 2014. The Dina evidence was the cornerstone of the prosecution's case, supported by the jacket, the matching button, the testimony of the colleague who had lent it, and cell tower records placing Fenwick's mobile phone within a quarter-mile of the farm supply lot on the night of September 12th. Court documents confirmed that Fenwick never took the stand. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They returned a verdict of guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He has made no public statement since the verdict. Records show he attended Karen's memorial service 11 days after she disappeared. Ruth Aldridge was 69 years old when the verdict came in. She was in the courtroom. She was sitting in the third row, wearing a gray wool coat that Karen had given her one Christmas, with Maya beside her. Maya was 18. When the foreperson read the verdict, Ruth reached over and took her granddaughter's hand. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. In a later interview with a local television station, Ruth said simply, "I always knew the truth was somewhere. I just had to outlast the waiting." She said it without drama, the way she said most things. She folded her hands on the table in front of her and looked directly at the camera. She thanked Marcus Webb by name. She thanked Claire Voss by name. She thanked the people at Patsy's Diner who had never taken the poster down. Karen Aldridge was 34 years old. She made careful, cheerful lunches for her daughter every weekday morning while the Today Show played in the background. She tended a flower bed with the same quiet stubbornness she brought to everything she loved. She was the kind of nurse you wanted beside you when the world was frightening, and she made it less frightening. And then someone took her from the people who loved her and stood at her memorial with his hands folded and his head bowed. And the truth waited in a jacket collar through 9 winters until science caught up with what had been done. She had a future that belonged to her by right. Maya carries it forward. That matters. It matters more than the man who tried to erase it. Justice does not always move quickly. In this case, it moved slowly enough to feel like abandonment. But it moved. It found Karen Aldridge in 2013 through a technology that didn't fully exist when she was killed. Pursued by a retired detective who had no obligation to keep pushing, and identified through a distant relative who never knew their family tree would someday help close a murder case. That is not a coincidence. That is persistence. Across years, by people who believed the truth was worth finding regardless of how long it took. What do you think of a system that can take 9 years to find what was hiding in plain sight, and of what it says about the cases still waiting? Was justice served here? Or merely delayed long enough to feel like something else? And what does it mean that the person responsible spent 9 years among the people whose lives he had shattered, receiving comfort in the same grief he had caused? Leave your thoughts in the comments. We read every one. Justice came for Karen Aldridge after 9 years. Stories like hers are why this channel exists. If you believe truth is worth pursuing, no matter how long it takes, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. More are waiting in the description below. Thank you for being here.